Sequels tend to suffer from way more scrutiny than the average release. While many gamers are willing to forgive flaws or oversights in a debut title, the same love is not often extended to follow-ups, as the weight of expectation sits heavily on their shoulders. This sadly means that plenty of games that would have otherwise been considered good, if not great, are thrust into a world of unjustified hatred. So, I'm Sai, this is What Culture, and here are 10 hated video game sequels that everyone was too hard on. Mirror's Edge Catalyst. 2008's Mirror's Edge made a pretty decent impression on the gaming landscape when it ran onto the scene, and many people look back on this free-running speedfest as a hidden gem that probably didn't get the attention it deserved, despite its, frankly, generic narrative. The follow-up, however, is not so fondly remembered, but was Mirror's Edge Catalyst really that bad? This prequel shifted from the first game's carefully constructed linear design to an open-world setting, allowing players to explore the City of Glass at their own discretion. However, this significant alteration, alongside the once again lackluster story and clunky combat, drew plenty of ire from fans. Of course, while the transition from tightly designed linear levels to an open approach did neglect part of the original's appeal, the game still offered a fun environment to explore. Plus, the real highlight was the impeccable movement mechanics which genuinely improved upon the original. The free running was smoother than ever, with a focus on momentum and exploration that often pushed you into addictive flow states. Sure, not as good as the original, but Catalyst is still a gorgeous looking, high-octane parkour experience that not enough people talk about. Doom 64. Making a Doom game should be pretty easy, right? Step 1, give the player some big old guns. Step 2, throw some scary monsters at them. Step 3, carnage. However, finding the right blend of atmosphere, action, and thrills whilst keeping the franchise evolving is far from simple, as demonstrated by the harsh reaction to Doom 64. This spin-off game sought to bring the popular FPS series to the Nintendo 64 in a big way. Rather than reinventing the wheel, id Software and Midway chose to build a game mechanically similar to what came before, albeit with new sprites, levels, and a new engine. However, one significant change they made that rubbed many the wrong way was the shift in tone and pacing. Rather than being the typical non-stop action fest players were used to, Doom 64 instead focused more on puzzle solving and exploration with fewer enemy encounters. This frustrated many, yet it was a unique approach that allowed the game to create a stellar sense of atmosphere and dread. Doom 64's tough levels and less predictable firefights have caused a lot of fans to resent it, but the game has since developed a dedicated cult following, and rightfully so. Tomb Raider Underworld. Tomb Raider is a franchise that easy belongs on this list, as looking through its catalogue is like gazing at an assortment of chocolates. Some are so mouthwatering you'll want to gorge them down without hesitation, and others will make you think, yeah, I think I'll leave the bounties for someone else. But while the likes of Tomb Raider 2013 is a must-eat and The Angel of Darkness is a spit out of your mouth, what the hell is this kind of experience? The often needlessly hated Tomb Raider Underworld is delicious, but it might have an odd aftertaste. Okay, this simile is getting away from me. Underworld is the third game in Crystal Dynamics' first Lara Croft reboot, and whilst it's not the most disliked Tomb Raider out there, it certainly has a shed load of detractors. A significant portion of the criticism stems from the game's wonky camera, occasionally awkward controls, brief campaign, and some other issues. However, loving Underworld is easy if you're a fan of the classic Tomb Raider experience and have a soft spot for the franchise's goofier side. I mean, in the first game she fought a T-Rex, it's pretty silly. There's plenty of fun exploration, good puzzling and platforming, and a gorgeous visual design, and it also hits all of the fantastical vibes the series was known for before rebooting in 2013, with appearances from the Kraken, Thor's Hammer, and other over-the-top elements. So, what's not to love? Fable 3. You'll often find that there are only two camps when it comes to arguing about which Fable game is the best, the one for the original Fable, and people who are wrong. I'm kidding, of course, people love Fable 2, I'm not people, but people do love it. However, this obviously excludes a major game in the lineup, that being Albion's ugly little duckling, which is Fable 3. Whilst it's definitely not the best game in the series, there's certainly an argument that it deserves more love than it gets. Fable 3 is certainly flawed, with repetitive combat, forced mechanics like hand-holding, and shoddy UI choices. However, the game is not shy about taking risks, something exceedingly rare for AAA releases, and as such, the last thing you can call it is boring. The game takes you on a grand adventure across a land littered with fun characters voiced by big-name actors, with its main narrative and bountiful side content giving you plenty of laughs and action along the way. On top of that, the game's bizarre choices fill it with imaginative features, such as the fun real estate mechanics, genuinely, or the massive mid-game twist that flips the story and gameplay on its head. Sure, Fable 3 didn't quite stick the landing, but it at least did a couple of cool flips on the way down. Castlevania 64. Final Fantasy, The Legend of Zelda, Super Mario Bros. These are but a few examples of massively popular video game franchises that transitioned from 2D to 3D with unmatched grace. Heck, their respective jumps into the third dimension are still considered by many to be some of the best video games of all time. Sadly, the gothic action-adventure series Castlevania didn't join the 3D realm with that same level of prestige. Look, we've all kicked Castlevania 64 around a little bit, so maybe it's time to give it some of its well-deserved flowers. The one thing you need to know when going into the game is that it is janky. So janky, in fact, that you'd think that Dracula had put a curse on you, the player, directly to stop you from preventing his return. But if you can look past all this, you'll find that Castlevania 64, released of course simply as Castlevania, is actually a pretty enjoyable ride. It's utterly bombastic, and there is a boss fight, for example, where you battle a king skeleton surrounded by skeletons on motorbikes, which, okay, sure, didn't know that was a thing. But the atmosphere, classically Castlevania great music, balls-to-the-wall lunacy, and dual protagonists with unique abilities and storylines make it a flawed but enjoyable benchmark in early 3D gaming. Not every game can be Super Mario 64. Some games have to not be Super Mario 64, so we have a benchmark. Benchmarks are good. Silent Hill Downpour. Ah yes, the Silent Hill sequels. It's hard to find a collection of games more hated than these. The once untouchable horror series was slowly but surely decimated by the onslaught of generic, uninspired post-Silent Hill 4 releases that seem to forget what made the franchise special. Some people wouldn't even include Silent Hill 4 in the list of good ones, and they'd be wrong to do so, but it's way less common for fans to throw support at the likes of Silent Hill Downpour. So, let's give that a try. Downpour is far from the heights of the franchise, with the combat and monster designs being particularly bland. However, it boasts some plus points that are often overlooked, like the generally strong narrative. The story of escaped convict Murphy Pendleton facing the nightmares of the town after surviving a bus crash nearby makes for a thrilling setup, with some great payoff, especially in the player choice impacted endings. Additionally, the implementation of side quests adds a unique edge to the game that provides some stellar motivation for world exploration. Is it great? Maybe not, but it's not as bad as many people think that it is. The Legend of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. When asked to picture what a classic Legend of Zelda game looks like, you might think of the top-down 2D style of the original, or perhaps the polygonal 3D of Ocarina of Time, depending on your age. However, it's doubtful you'll think of the franchise's bizarro side-scroller Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. Nintendo at this point had yet to establish the Zelda mold when they completely broke it, introducing a sequel that not only switched the visual perspective, but also the focus, honing in on RPG elements and action over complex puzzle solving. Given this huge shift, the game has since become a maligned part of Hyrule's gaming roster, often falling into the lower ends of tier lists, if not at the very bottom, if not for Skyward Sword. God, I hate that game. But those who hate Zelda 2 for simply being different are robbing themselves of a great NES experience. This action-packed game, while not a conventional Zelda title, is a thrilling adventure with challenging combat that keeps you on your toes, interactive NPCs, and solid RPG elements. It's a great time if you were looking for a throwback to late 80s gaming. It's also the origin of a bunch of really great Zelda songs as well, so that's good too. Banjo Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Imagine, if you will, that the massively anticipated Half-Life 3 were to release finally, but as a tile-matching puzzle game. Even if it was the best tile-matching puzzle game ever made, plenty of people would still hate it for being a tile-matching puzzle game. That is precisely what happened to the Banjo-Kazooie series, as the long-awaited third game switched up the formula so much that it drove fans to fury, despite being actually pretty good at what it set out to do. Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts released 8 years after the last mainline title, so fans were foaming at the mouth at the mere thought of it. However, when they got their hands on the game, rather than the typical 3D platforming they were accustomed to, the gameplay instead focused on vehicle building. Now, this was very jarring, and you're entitled to feel certain ways about it being completely jarring, but there's no denying that the mechanic was incredibly well executed. Yes, it was a major department from what fans expected, but the crafting pushed your creativity to the max, allowing you to find unique solutions to problems and experiment in meaningful ways. The bright and colourful atmosphere was still there in droves, as was the humour, so while everything was different, it also still felt authentic to the series. Also, Tears of the Kingdom did basically the same mechanic and everyone loved it, and it fits in Zelda as much as it fits in Banjo, so What's the problem? Fatal Frame 4 Mask of the Lunar Eclipse. There are two things that all but every Fatal Frame, or Project Zero depending on who you ask, fan can agree on. That Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly is the best game in the series, and that Fatal Frame 4 Mask of the Lunar Eclipse is one of the weakest. However, Lunar Eclipse is not necessarily a bad game, it's just being compared to some of the best horror titles of all time, so you kind of forget that it's got plenty of things going for it. The game tells an incredibly atmospheric and melancholic story about a collection of characters, two girls with a mysterious past and the detective who rescued them. This trio return to the scene of their haunted past wielding the iconic camera obscura and the new Spirit Stone flashlight. And the aforementioned flashlight introduces a thrilling new feature to the series, utilising motion control in a way that was actually fun. Sadly, a lot of the game's hate stems from forces outside of its control, such as being on the Nintendo Wii, and the company's refusal to localise it to the West until the 2023 remaster. As such, it's often regarded as the black sheep of the Fatal Frame franchise, despite putting in a pretty admirable effort. Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. Senua's Sacrifice rocked the industry back in 2017, setting a new benchmark for AA gaming. It was visually impressive, cinematically astounding, and an absolute masterclass in sound design, with the biggest drawbacks being the slow pacing and mediocre combat. Unfortunately, the recent-ish sequel Hellblade 2 was visually impressive, cinematically astounding, and a masterclass in sound design, but it was also let down by slow pacing and mediocre combat. Who could have seen that coming? In fairness, it's often expected that a gaming sequel will improve upon its predecessor's weak points, so Hellblade 2's repetitive battles and brief as hell runtime are valid letdowns. However, while Ninja Theory fell at this hurdle, they upped the ante on the spectacle, delivering a game with atmosphere, phenomenal acting, and a dedicated focus on storytelling. While the brief runtime is a big shame, it at least packs a punch with the time that it does have. Senua's Saga is by no means the masterpiece that fans were hoping it would be, but it feels damn unfair to hate a perfectly decent if flawed game simply for not revolutionising the industry for a second time. Hey, if you want to stick with us talking about video game sequels, here's a video on screen now for 10 perfect video games with even better sequels. Thanks for watching this video. I've been Cypher What Culture, and have a good week.